Hello, it's John Everington here. Thank you for looking in on my YouTube. So I've got my good friend Anthony here who's going to help me. So I thought you might find it interesting if I talk about some real cases. This one dates from the 1990s that I dealt with back then, and involves a man. I shall call him Hussein, and that's not his real name. But you'll note that his name is Muslim, and he was in his 30s. The police were called to his house following a disturbance with his partner. Neighbours called them, and when the police came, his partner had left the house and he was there with his 3 young children. And the police asked to look around the house, and he voluntarily showed the police 2 guns. And the police took them away. They were imitation firearms, and the police scientist noticed that one of the guns, he'd attempted to convert it into a real firearm. But that said, the scientist said that it was a pretty poor effort to change the gun. Hussein had quite moderate to severe learning disability. He was deaf. And couldn't read or write, and struggled a bit. So anyway, Anthony, do you want to ask any questions? Or?
Yeah, who called the police?
So the police, the neighbours called the police when they heard a disturbance. According to the police, there'd been no incidents before this, no call-outs before that time. So this was the first incident of that they'd been called to their house.
Were they married, and how long had they been together, and how old were the children?
The children were aged 3, 5 and 8. They'd been married about 10 years. They'd met in Cyprus. They were Turkish Cypriots. He went on holiday to his grandmother's, and the young lady lived next door. He claimed that she was only interested in marrying him because that he felt she just wanted to get away from the house where she was living, and wanted to get out of Cyprus and come to the UK. So that's, he says, that's why she wanted to marry him.
Did you say that she had left before the police arrived?
She'd left before the police arrived, and she'd found herself a new partner, and this is what the argument was about. And it really worries me that what were his motives in converting the gun. Did he have intention to go around and shoot this chap, you know, a new partner? He claims not. He claims that the guns were not used for that purpose, and he had no intention, that he'd never threatened her with a gun or anything like that, and they kept them as imitation firearms to be used in case they were burgled. He was worried about being burgled.
So he was anticipating a firearm that worked, but he was pretty inept at fashioning something.
Oh yes, yeah, it was. So traditionally, it's a difficult case because there are lots of concerns. At the time of writing the report, he'd now moved in with his parents. They were quite elderly, failing health. She moved in with this new chap. Initially, they had the children, but about 2 months with the children, 2 months later, they arrived at the grandparents' house in a taxi, unannounced, with a message that she didn't want to look after them anymore. Which is a bit surprising, isn't it? But unusual. worrying, and all these years later I'm kind of thinking I'm worried about the welfare of the children. So there was a tension in this case. In those days, this chap was a first-time offender. Somebody like that, you kind of, in those days, were keen to keep them out of the criminal justice system and try and intervene and say, look, you know, in a non-criminal justice way, because the theory was that if they were pulled into the criminal justice system, it would make them worse. So, for example, if he'd gone to jail, it could have been very extremely damaging to him, or if he'd been on a community service project with sophisticated offenders, in theory.
So he could be influenced by that.
He could be influenced by them. So, in those days, the theory was keep him out. But lots of worries about this guy.
So the idea was to keep him out of the potential for further trouble.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of surmising that you had assessed him then as low risk for that reason, that you felt that he wasn't likely to get into trouble in the future.
Yeah, I thought he was fairly low risk.
Yeah.
At the time. Now I don't know, actually. Now I'm reflecting back on it, I'm not so sure. I've got worries, you know.
What are your worries?
My worry is, what were his motives? And my worries are about his children. And I think the need is a probation officer in those circumstances needs to find out as much information and to communicate with the other agencies. And the key agencies here are the police, around the facts of the case, but also, and really, we really need good prosecution papers to come through, and they're not always that good. We need plenty of good information.
So if there's a case that is low risk, you would often get just a summary of the offence.
Oh yeah,
just a
summary, or often not very good.
So how helpful are the police when you need more information?
Not always, unfortunately, but they should be. So key issues here are, you know, are there other concerns? I mean, today they'll be looking at his laptop to see if he's been following terrorist groups and things like that. Recently, there was a case in Plymouth where a chap with learning disability, he was autistic, he had problems, he was very isolated, and he was following these American groups on the internet that were quite concerning, and they were kind of basically women haters on this site that he was following. So somebody like that, you need, who's trying to convert a gun into a weapon, you need to do a full check on them and check on the internet, so what they've been looking at, things like that. I suppose in the 90s it wasn't such an issue, was it? But
how would you access that level of investigation these days? This was a guy who'd assessed as a low risk. Obviously, however low that risk is, the concerns that may have been high. Had he fashioned a weapon that was useful?
Yeah, I think what I have done on occasion is I've contacted the arresting officers to find out more information, and to find out a bit more. And the other people I'll be contacting is social services, to make sure they're aware of the offence, and also to get them to perhaps go and do an assessment of the family circumstances and to see if they need a bit more support, you know, for the children.
There will be a lot of people who might imagine, okay, you mentioned this person is Muslim,
yeah.
You mentioned this person is fashioning guns.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of people who might say, why don't you refer to prevent? Would you refer to prevent these days?
Only if there's evidence for that, of interest in terrorist activities, really. There wasn't any in this case. Yeah, you need reassurance from the police, really.
Right, so it would be helpful to have reassurance from the police.
Yeah.
To have a mechanism to find out a bit more information.
Yeah. Yeah.
To help you to make that decision that there is no terrorist sympathies or radical extremist sympathies, as they're labelled now.
Yeah. So, would probation supervision be useful in this case, do you think, Anthony?
Excuse me. I suppose the question is, what is the purpose of probation supervision in this case? It's considered a low risk, but there are concerns about the nature of the risk.
Yeah.
So probation supervision might be considered useful, at least in terms of monitoring and giving you an opportunity to gather more information about what the nature of that risk might be.
Yeah.
The primary purpose of probation supervision is, of course, to ensure rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Difficult to justify if there are no previous convictions and you don't think that there are likely to be further convictions. It's often difficult to justify to a court, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody might argue that it's unfair and unreasonable to intrude unnecessarily, given that your assessment is low. And
I'm glad you're saying. I think that's where I was at all those years ago with this case, actually.
Yeah. So what was you?
That's where I was at.
Is that where you were at?
Yeah,
when you wrote this?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was difficult, isn't it? But still worrying, isn't it?
It is.
I think. Anyway, I think information exchange is key, isn't it? And that's all really, isn't it? And a lot of information sharing between agencies is so helpful. Anyway, thank you for looking in, and do look at our other cases. Cheers now. Bye-bye.